Welcome to TIDES. Today, we are diving into a powerful intersection between technology and consulting, exploring how AI is reshaping one of the most human-centered fields. Our guest today, Saurabh Kapoor, is the founder and managing director of Tower Strategy Group, a boutique consultancy known for driving transformation with some of the world's leading brands and federal agencies. Saurabh has brought AI into the heart of his consulting practice, using it to bridge strategy with execution and to enhance client outcomes in innovative new ways. In this episode, Saurabh takes us on his journey of integrating AI, sharing key decisions and pivotal moments that led him to experiment with AI as part of his consulting toolkit. We'll dive into how he built his proprietary platform, the challenges and opportunities he encountered, and the profound impact he's seeing on both his business and his clients. For those of you curious about how AI can be more than just a technical tool, and instead a strategic advantage, this conversation is filled with actionable insights. So join us as we unpack Saurabh's AI journey and explore what it means to blend cutting-edge technology with deep consulting expertise. Saurabh, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Shweta. Thanks for having me on.
All right, let's get started with your decision to integrate AI into consulting. And we know AI in consulting is a relatively new field. So what was the catalyst that made you decide to experiment with AI in your practice? Was there a particular moment or a trend that made you realize it was time to take the leap?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think there's probably two things that drove the initial toe in the water with AI. The first is after 15 years or so, 16 years, you start to, having a consulting firm, you start to really align on what your values are. One of our values is around innovation. And it's felt like creative, innovative space where, I felt as AI increasingly entered the zeitgeist about 2 years back, that perhaps it could create differentiation for us if we got on the front end of the trend versus being on the back end of it. We're part of the critical mass, if you will. The other thing that happened, if you think about our service set, basically we do 3 types of engagements for our clients. We do transformation engagements where they're looking to do something big, bold, new, different. We do turnaround work where they are in distress of some kind and looking to right the ship. And then we do integration work, helping them to connect these kind of big bloated systems and processes and organizations that they might have. As AI increasingly came to the forefront about 2 years ago, I started to feel like if we chose not to proactively transform at that stage, we'd probably be facing a turnaround ourselves at some point in the future. And I personally, having been around a turnaround opportunities, was not interested in Tower Strategy becoming blockbustered during this AI revolution. So the choice, in addition to wanting to innovate and be on the front end, was also this feeling that with the way the market was moving, if we didn't get out ahead of it really rapidly, we'd be left behind.
Yeah. Well, Blockbuster is a great example to use in this context. But once you decided that that's the route that you want to choose, you want to, not be the blockbuster and be left behind when innovation is reshaping the business environment. How did you go about assessing the potential value that AI could bring to your clients and consulting services? What were the key strategic considerations that informed your decision?
Yeah, it's a good question. Also, I think we'd benefited because we have been investing in technology, broadly speaking, for probably the past 6 years. At this stage, so we've got this platform called Fusion Accelerator, which started off as a way to productize and standardize some of the work that we're doing for clients on a repeat basis, right? So we kept making the same spreadsheets over and over again, and I was like, why are we making this spreadsheet a 10th or 15th time? We could probably digitize this in some way and have a standard set of frameworks around which all of our client engagements revolve. That particular investment, and Fusion's evolved a lot since then. It has paid dividends. We already had use cases around technology where, from a consulting perspective, we saw the power of, in what is a very qualitative service at times and a very human service, we saw the advantage of having a technology backbone to what we do. AI represented kind of this next stage and this next evolution of if some, basic technology with algorithms that we've built and frameworks and logic that we built can deliver the results that it has for us, how could AI potentially layer on top of that, right? So we had a good foundation and a good test case, and I think that gave us a lot of motivation. When we started with the premise that nothing was off the table. And that's not that we're going to go out and use AI in order to, produce client deliverables from scratch and things like that. But the open question that we were asking was, if this thing that we don't really understand, and we didn't understand it, perfectly honest, 2 years ago, we're kind of scratching our heads being like, this seems like a thing. It could be really disruptive. We're not sure if it's going to be a thing, and maybe it's overhyped. Despite, I would say, a healthy dose of skepticism, where we started was, but we don't know what we don't know. And so we use a totally blank sheet of paper and think about AI touching any and all portions of the firm, whether it's client delivery or internal operations. Where are all of the places that could potentially plug in? And so we started with building a roadmap to say, here's all the places AI could touch. Where can it be effective today at that stage? Yes or no? What are the platforms that are available to us? And based on that, let's pick an isolated set of use cases that we think are highest value in terms of delivering work, but that have the highest potential to succeed also, to see if we can build a virtuous cycle for ourselves, right? So we started with a really broad net and then narrowed it down to about 4 or 5 use cases that we really wanted to test out, but test out in detail.
Mm-hmm. Who did you have at the table brainstorming and ideating with you to paint that picture of what's the art of the possible?
Yeah.
Where can we implement AI?
So we're a boutique strategy consulting firm, right? So we've only got 14 people. And so everybody was at the table. So this was not somebody's holding the secret sauce on AI within the firm. I think we were all equally as semi-informed about what AI was capable of. Perhaps different people on the team had different levels of knowledge about different aspects of AI. But the goal initially was, whether you're the most senior person at the firm or the most recent hire, you probably got something to add to this conversation. So can we get everybody at the table and just ideate in a really free-form way? And so what we ended up doing through this process was having everybody at the firm, quite honestly, work on an internal strategy project about what was possible with AI. We established a framework with which, because we're consultants, we established a framework with which to define and create a discrete set of use cases. And then we completely democratized use after that. We're like, if these are the 5 use cases, across those 5s, here are the subgroups that are involved with each one, and you go create. And whatever fails, fails. No harm in failing. In fact, we should fail and figure out what's not working. What's working, you bring it to the forefront. We, as a collective, will then evolve those thoughts and standardize and create best practice. And that's what got the momentum going, and fits and starts, if I was going to be totally honest with you, right? It's like hard to get onto the AI bandwagon fully, but that democratization and pushing it down into the organization to say, it's not a small group, it's everyone. For us, it's everyone, right? So it's a big group, and everyone's going to try and create in this space. And the breakthroughs came over time at every different level, depending on what it was that we were working on. And I think that's been kind of one of the most profound parts of it, is as a new space, there aren't experts sitting on anybody's bench. Maybe there are more now, but there were definitely not any 2 years ago who knew turnkey, here's how I'm going to apply AI in consulting. And so allowing people to be in free creative space and giving them the agency, I think, to get it wrong and to admit that they got it wrong, I think that was a hugely powerful learning moment for us.
Fantastic. And did you notice in the early stages when you proposed this idea of exploring and ideating with AI, did you sense that the team was fully on board, or did you sense that there was resistance? Did you have to, how did you continue the momentum? Because this didn't happen overnight.
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. I think there's people who were mostly cautiously optimistic and excited about it. We tend to hire on our team with people who have a growth-oriented and innovation-focused mindset. And I know a lot of corporate value statements say that, but I think it's actually very true about our DNA. We want people who are seekers and searchers and who want to kind of go create the next thing. And that next thing could be a new framework for a client on a strategy project. It could be finding a new way to deliver work. So I think the team was largely pretty energized to go do this. Funny story. One of the colleagues early on, and I'll tell you about the naysayers in a second. They weren't really naysayers, but like one of our colleagues early on, we had this conversation internally about the use of AI, and he goes, "That's really funny because I was just talking to my uncle about AI this weekend. He's in his 20s. He's like, I was talking to my uncle about AI this weekend, and my uncle was suggesting I try and use it for work, but that I shouldn't let my boss know because I could get into trouble." And us just being as open as we could be about, like, we're going to try this and it may or may not work, I think was a bit of a breath of fresh air for people who are feeling that perhaps in other organizations there might be some kind of a punitive culture or some kind of, we have restrictions on strong SOPs, but we're not saying don't use it. We're saying use it in a reasonable and human-centered way, right? So that's the majority of the team, I think, was pretty motivated to say, all right, we're going to go try this new cool thing and see what we can do with it. I think there were a few folks who were concerned that AI potentially had implications on their jobs if we learn to use it really, really effectively, or because AI is prone to hallucinating. And I think the value that people are able to deliver off of AI still is pretty variable overall. We're just skeptical about whether or not it would be effective or useful, or if they potentially saw it as a threat internally.
Yeah.
And I think to start to break, and we've seen that with even newer staff who've joined in the last 4, 5, 6 months. And the way that we have, resistance is an overstatement, but the way that we have helped them feel more comfortable with AI is, first of all, helping them understand that AI is not really a substitute for us, for humans, right? We are using AI as an additional tool in our toolkit, just like we would use Microsoft Excel or a Google search in order to help augment, accentuate, accelerate, enrich our work. So first of all, it's not taking your spot. It's an assistant and an aid in doing your work. Secondly, and we've honored this commitment by using AI as effectively as we have, and I think this is where we built a strong culture around use of AI and less concerns over it. We've been freeing up that time to focus on higher value things with clients, whether that's doing additional analytics that perhaps we didn't have the time to do previously, but now our scope can be a bit richer than it was because we're freeing human time to focus on those other activities, or whether it's actually developing and generating deeper client intimacy, not just in terms of relationship, but in terms of advisory work, because A, we have a richer fact base than what we've had historically. And secondly, that time that's now freed up to think about the client problem in a much more free-form way. We're not reducing effort on client relationships. We're shifting that effort towards higher value activities, I think, that perhaps just like we use a calculator to do basic math,
Yeah.
AI can do some basic things like theme extraction from large data sets.
Yeah. Very good point. And I'm sure that when you were making these choices and decisions with your team to start experimenting with tools, you must have been in that situation, like every one of us, that the tool landscape is growing by the day. How did you make the choice of which tool to start experimenting with, especially because it's not just internal work, you deal with a lot of client information as well that has to be fed into these systems?
Yeah. It's a great question. So we actually started off with a prohibition, right? So the prohibition was that no client proprietary or sensitive data is going to make it onto any platform. And this was, a prohibition that was in effect probably for the first 16 months of our AI use, especially when we're dependent on third-party platforms fully for enabling that work itself. So that was a starting place. Like, we're going to protect information, and there's going to be a strong set of standard operating procedures around our use to make sure that we are not doing anything with client data that's untoward. So if we have a client financial statement, for example, we're not going to put it onto whether it's ChatGPT or Claude 3.5 Sonnet, it's not going on. Right? So that was the baseline. From there, we didn't know what platforms were going to work for us or not going to work for us. So a little bit, I think Wild West might be an overstatement, but a little bit Wild West in terms of if you've heard about a good platform and you've done the tire kicking on it to make sure that it's a credible platform, that it's hitting benchmarks that are publicly available in terms of logic, by way of example, and it's operated and funded by organizations that seem to value data and privacy. So is it effective and is it safe? That's the question. Those are the questions we're asking. You should go use it. You should go try it and see what we're able to generate off of it. So we're probably in that space up until if we started this, 20, 24 months ago, this journey, we're probably in that space of go try it. And if it works, let me know. And let's like iterate on that concept. It was this past spring and summer that we began to lock down the platforms that we were on much more fully, right? So the only platform that not, we don't get paid a royalty by these guys, but the backbone of our platform, which is proprietary now, we've brought AI into Fusion, is Anthropic. Right? And we like the Anthropic models a lot, both because of their power and their reasoning ability. They seem to function well with the type of work that we want to do. We also really loved the parameters that they put around safety and security and trust and what they were doing with data at the time. Now we've got additional barriers because we've done an API integration of Anthropic's models into our own proprietary platform. So there's even a further wall between the data sets that we use and those models. But it was this cascading level of we don't know what's out there. Let's identify a pool of what we want to test against. Let's let people experiment. As we learn, we're going to further narrow down that pool of trustworthy platforms. And when we feel like one has elevated to a level that we can see its utility and application across a wide range of our workflow, which is where Anthropic emerged, we're going to fully lock in on that particular platform. So everything that we're doing now is very Anthropic centric. Again, the API integration into Fusion in our own sandbox, so to speak.
Fantastic. And did you, when you opened up your organizational ecosystem for people, inviting people to start experimenting with different tools, did they have to carve out a specific part of their time to focus on AI? Did you have to upskill, reskill any of your staff, or everybody was just like figuring it out while they were doing their day-to-day?
Yeah, that's come in waves. Initially, they were figuring it out in their day-to-day, right? So our whole thing was AI is not any different than the work we're already doing, right? So it should be, for us to use AI effectively, its use has to be on the path that we're already on. So we deliver client engagements a certain way. We collect certain types of data. We do certain types of analysis. So we're not going to reinvent any of that. But if on that journey that we're already on, AI can splice in as an additional tool, then we should be finding those opportunities to use it. If it's proving effective, double down and try harder. What more can you do with it? If it's not proving effective, you've run a series of prompts and you're getting garbage back, or the use case was overpromised, underdelivered. Abandon it, move on, do work like you've always done the work, right? So let's fail fast where it's not working. Where it is working, let's really lean in. And then let's start to, at the time, we were having monthly AI meetings internally to come back and talk about, proven use cases and things like that. And we'd asked ChatGPT to give us a name for that meeting, and it had this ridiculous name. But the ridiculousness of the name, I think, created a fun culture and atmosphere around it that was kind of like, it felt light and not something that was heavy duty. And so it depressurized the situation was the best way that I can describe it. I would say probably, 4 or 5 months ago, as we got enough repetitions underneath us, the focus started to shift much more towards how do you now start to institutionalize the use of AI and get away from what's been very organic in terms of best practices development and sharing into a much more purposeful, coherent, this is the way we use it, this is the way we're always going to use it, here's a standard prompt, this prompt in this situation works the best. So we've been building that infrastructure now, many months in, to say we know what works well, we know what doesn't work well. There will be new good use cases that emerge. For the things that are working, how do you create the same tools for everybody who's on that particular type of workflow to be able to use on repeat and repetition, so we can standardize the value that's being created off of AI across the firm itself?
Fantastic. And did you, I have so many curiosity questions because we are getting into real things that people can experiment with as they embark on this journey. So I'm just curious to know, because AI is new, and especially in a consulting environment, which is not very tech heavy per se, did you have to look at new roles to add to your team who would be looking at the technical side of AI implementation, like implementing Claude or selecting which LLM to go with and how to connect the LLM with your proprietary platform that you already have?
Yeah, so we've relied both on internal resources and external partners for different aspects of that, right? So I think where we got to internally, there are few of us who are especially prone to nerding out on whatever topic you put in front of us. And so there was a lot of effort put into place, even though people didn't come to the table with a ton of AI knowledge to begin with, just given how nascent the space is. There were a few people who I would say grabbed the bull by the horns and just really everything from reading any academic paper they could get their hands on to understand the theory and the technology behind AI, through to trying to use AI for anything and everything and learning organically. We had people all over the spectrum, right? But there's three or four, and they each fall into some of those buckets, who I think have really been driving this engine for us overall, like pioneering how we use it, what we use it for, bringing new concepts to the table. We didn't know what RAG was, for example, when we started on this journey. One member of our staff was like, here's this thing called RAG and we should check it out. And, what about a RAG enabled API integration of one of these LLMs into Fusion? And that started us on this path of really trying to think through what's possible, right? So again, it gets to democratizing to a degree, the creativity, the information gathering, just the searching and seeking out of what's possible. And I think that served us very, very well. In terms of how we've actually pulled it off and enabled it, we have a series of third-party developers who help us with core legacy application development, right? Our legacy developer, to be totally honest, wasn't fully prepared or equipped to do this body of work as we started to make the transition from traditional cloud-based software to an AI implementation on that platform. So we ended up having to leave that developer behind. They did a great job for us for several years, and shifted gears instead to two new developers, one who we believe can maintain the core platform with AI integrated into it, but one who's a stopgap developer. And that stopgap developer especially has depth in data science. And what I've come to believe over time is, the LLMs are great, and I think that's an arms race. You can argue, depending on the month, who's ahead of who and whatnot, and we'll see what the future holds on that front. But the foundation of it is really information, right? So if you have the right information structured the right way, and you have, in our case, an API call structured in a way that it knows how to access those different information containers correctly, depending on what you're actually trying to ask it a question about or what assistance you need, I think there's a tremendous power there. And what we ended up doing is hiring this data sciences company that does development as a side hustle, not as their primary job, right? They're not doing front-end development day in, day out, to help us architect the back end of this thing so that what I think is a relatively commoditized piece, which is that API call, and even prompt writing, I think is somewhat commoditized, and it will be in the future. We're very focused on, are your data sets and your content structured correctly and appropriately, so you're getting the right information to the large language model at the right time, as rich as it needs to be for that particular context, but not richer than it needs to be. And that boundary setting for us has actually been very, very powerful.
Fantastic. And because we've talked about Fusion a couple of times, I think it'll be helpful for our audience to understand what is Fusion as your platform, and we will then be able to connect the dots with how you brought in new developers to integrate AI into that platform. So what does Fusion do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Fusion does everything for us, almost everything for us, right? So it started off initially, like I think a lot of innovations do, in a very niche and specific way. It was much more about an internal efficiency gain for us over time. I'm happy to talk to you about like where it started off and what that functionality was at the outset. But because it was niche, it was touching one particular aspect of our workflow, client facing, and that was it. Where it's evolved to at this point is we can run full client projects on Fusion and as the backbone, right? From a technology perspective, when I say run full client projects as a backbone on Fusion, it's everything from the initial strategic planning phase, right? So a client comes to us and they're like, hey, look, my business is sucking wind. I don't know what happened. I lost my way at some point. Profit is way below what it should be. revenues declining over time. I have 50 reasons I can think of for what may have gone wrong. Where Fusion starts on most client engagements is helping to coalesce and contain what those hypotheses and those ideas are, going through the due diligence process with us for collecting data and information around those 50 odd ideas, or it could be 100, right? Of doing the diagnostic and then turning that diagnostic into a roadmap for our clients, which other people would call a strategy. So we identify, diagnose, structure strategic plans in Fusion, right? So that's where Fusion really starts and begins on client engagements. What we have built over time is an ability to carry those strategic plans forward into execution. So directly coming off of a strategic planning process, we now have huge amounts of data on clients in terms of not just what ails them, but what they can do about it and who within their organization owns those different functional capabilities, right? Who should be leading the charge in each of the areas that they need to potentially course correct on. So Fusion actually also enables change management planning. It enables teams to begin acting on those change programs. It gets into governance and PMO, so tracking through dashboards of how change programs are progressing, and allows for business process reengineering. And that's one linear flow. There's an offshoot off of Fusion, because the question always then secondarily for clients is, but do I have the right people and are they deployed the right way? And does my organizational structure, resource deployment model need to change? Fusion also allows us to make those, help inform those decisions at clients by mapping roles and responsibilities to organizations' functional requirements in relation to their strategy. So as you start to think about headcount, both number of headcount or FTEs that you've got, as well as how they're deployed, there's a consistent data backbone that's tied to their strategy that allows you to make those resource deployment choices. So it is a soup to nuts strategic planning through to change program enablement application.
Yeah. So the way I'm wrapping my head around the story is that when you were looking at AI integration into your business, it was a two-pronged approach. The consultants had to figure out how to use AI to do day-to-day job as they're consulting with their businesses, clients. And there was also a product enhancement that was happening at the same time by introducing AI into the Fusion product.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And the goal of integrating into Fusion, there's work that we do that's outside of the Fusion platform, right? So if somebody came to us and they said, hey, look, I'm trying to figure out how big this market is in this particular country, Fusion as an application is not going to support that workflow. What Fusion will do is it'll take the outputs of that workflow and feed it back into the strategic planning process to help build a strategy. So there's still core firm workflows that sit outside of the application. The application is the center point overall. What we're doing through AI integration onto Fusion is, first of all, bringing some of that external capability, external to Fusion capability, directly onto the platform itself. So if somebody on our side is sitting in a client meeting and they're struggling with how to implement Lean Six Sigma practices in one of their manufacturing facilities, it's not just our team's knowledge and that client's knowledge at the table, but because Fusion AI is sitting there, we're able to tap into Fusion AI to help with ideation and hypothesis building for how Lean Six Sigma may apply to solve that particular client's problem in that particular environment, because their data set is also sitting on our platform at that particular point in time, right? So we have this highly contextualized environment in which we're operating AI to help with some of these workflows that previously were happening, but they're happening in a conference room, or they're happening behind the scenes. We're kind of bringing that to the forefront. They extend that all the way to, if we're working on a client project and we've been working with them for 18 months, let's say, and we built their strategic plan, we built their change management plan, and they began implementing it. And they've got 10 transformation teams working internally. And we've been tracking progress, week in, week out, month in, month out. And there's a question about the effectiveness of their leadership team and which teams seem to be hitting the most roadblocks with the greatest frequency in relation to certain themes or trends, let's say lack of ability to drive buy-in top down within the organization, which is causing them to stall out on certain initiatives. AI is also helping us with theme extraction at that level and pattern recognition to say, right, beyond the dashboards that we've built historically, since we have so much natural language content sitting on the platform, like people commenting on what they're working on, the difficulties they're facing, can we begin to extract from these really rich data sets what's happening on the ground in a case like that across large stakeholder groups, 250 people, 300 people who may be commenting on a certain change program? Can we extract out of that these bigger themes that, again, a human would have been doing historically? We're still reviewing that information ourselves. We're still reading those notes. But to have a thought partner sitting there with us is really, really powerful. So it's still the same workflows, but I think they're even heightened and accelerated because we've created direct access for our AI to large data sets that we have without having to repurpose and restructure them in some external environment.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And at what point in this journey did you get the clients involved to let them know that, yes, your practice is now AI augmented and your consultants are AI augmented?
From the start, quite honestly, for client-facing work, right? So I've spoken to clients about all the work they were doing on the back office side with respect to AI. But anytime that we use AI, starting at the very beginning on client projects, we do a full disclosure, which is we're using AI. Here's the platforms that we're using. Here's the use cases. Here's how we're keeping humans in the center. And our commitment to clients is you'll never get a AI-only work product, but you'll get AI-enriched work products if you're comfortable with it. And we've given clients from the beginning the opt-out choice, right? Which is if you don't want us to use AI, you let us know and we're not going to use it. But we're also not going to use it behind the scenes and pretend like we're not using it. And that disclosure has been really, really fascinating, including because the range of client reactions has been very, very wide as we've had those conversations.
And how did you manage those reactions, especially the ones where the clients were not receiving this news as positive or they had concerns about data privacy ethics?
So no client has said no to us yet. So let me start there, right? So even where clients, you can see it, especially on a Zoom call or Teams call, and it comes up, and some clients, their eyes will get really big and like wide, and you can see there's concern there, and addressing that concern is about being very honest about what you're using it for, how humans are in the center, the platforms you've selected, what's happening with their data, and how you're protecting it overall, and the safeguards that you have in place to control for hallucinations and AI just getting it wrong. And AI gets it wrong all the time, by the way. So it's helping them understand that you understand that AI is not the solution and infallible, but that it's honestly incredibly flawed at times, and that you're controlling for it and you're controlling for the risk, right? And helping them understand the ethics. So I think that helps a ton. I think what I've been more surprised, and that's only been a few clients I would say who have been concerned about it. What I've been surprised by, because the other time I think people's eyes get really wide, is when they're like, "Oh wow, that's cool." So the fascinating thing has been, we just did this with a government agency about 3 weeks ago. We told them we're using AI. We told them what we're using AI for. We showed them the regulations that we know of in the federal government that define use of artificial intelligence. We were very specific about how we're in line with those guidelines. And they're like, okay, cool, we got it. Also, can you demo for us how you're using it? Because we're really curious. And like that was a really nice kind of outcome and output, which our next meeting with them was a status update. It was scheduled for an hour, and we spent 10 minutes, maybe 15, talking about the status of the project, and the rest of it running them through some of the conversations that we'd been having with AI about the challenge that they were facing. It was just this very cool, teaching, collaboration, the walls are down moment with the client, and to see them react wistful, that hoping that their organization would perhaps allow them to use AI more than they were able to use it currently. That was a cool experience.
Yeah, yeah. Fascinating, isn't it? Like if we look at our journey with AI and Gen AI specifically 2 years ago when it was first launched, and how people reacted to it to where it is today and how people react to it, do you see there's a big shift? Like people are more open to hearing about and experimenting with AI today versus 2 years ago? Or do you think that the shift is happening, but it's still very slow?
I think it's happening, but still very slow. And I think I'm personally seeing a shift in the fear also. I think the fear of 2 years ago was much more around what is this thing? Maybe if I had to be extreme, is it going to take over the world? What does it mean for my job? Can it really be trusted? Like all these like real doubts about it. What I'm sensing from executives now, because we don't really work with legal departments, for example, right? So what I'm experiencing, they might be stakeholders on a project, but that's usually not our primary client. We're seeing much more of now is hesitation for one or two reasons, either because the client is worried that legal doesn't currently have a policy around AI, and an acknowledgement on their part that legal probably doesn't understand AI. And as a result, if there were a policy in place, the policy might be overly restrictive. So there's this like concern of, can we navigate the procurement cycle internally if we're going to engage you guys to allow you to use AI and have legal be on board? Because there's this perceived risk. And if you see risk, you want to be able to control it. And by the time you get it through the legal and policy process, the need for the project's going to be over. Right? So there's like these interesting timeline considerations of what's the implication on the organization. I think the other concern that I'm seeing from clients on this front still is, if you're using AI on this particular project, then what are the people really doing? And that doesn't really happen with the clients that we've had for a long time. Like I have client relationships that go back 15 or 20 years, right? So there's a lot of trust built up in those relationships. But when you're talking to a client who's brand new and you're trying to get your foot in the door and they hear that you're using AI, there's a little bit of excitement around, all right, here's like a cool, innovative company that's maybe doing something a bit different. But I think that's paralleled with a bit of, then why are there so many hours in this proposal? And what are these people going to be doing? And shouldn't I get a cost reduction potentially because AI has been being used to accelerate this work overall? And I think, personally, that's a very slippery slope because you start to get to not well tested AI output that's commoditized in nature. And so, our commitment is to not go down the path of no human involvement. But that doesn't mean that client concern doesn't exist. That's something that I think we have to be ready to combat's maybe the wrong word, but acknowledge and alleviate.
Yeah, yeah. So for clients who challenge you, how do you address that question? For the clients who are like, what's the benefit for me if you're optimizing your consulting environment with AI?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think stories or examples help. So I'll come back to the example in a second. But I think the front end of it is understanding what their concern is and helping them understand how that time is being repurposed or reset from a value driving perspective. So what we talked about earlier, which is, yes, we're going to use AI. We're going to use AI in certain aspects of our work where it makes sense to be able to use it. Yes, it will free up our time. But as that two things, one, through the use of AI, I actually do think the work product's going to get enriched because we now have access to data sets that you would have never had access to previously unless you went out and purchased a secondary, syndicated market research report of some kind. There's knowledge has flattened in really, really substantial and robust ways. And so by not using AI, we're actually diminishing the value of what we're able to deliver, right? So it's helping them understand the value for themselves in terms of the richness of the work. I think the second piece for us is, if we're using AI to extract richer data and bring it to a table for decision-making purposes, what are the conversations that we can begin to have now, right? So it's elevating the consultative advisory work that we're doing and steering away from the more commoditized data-driven work that's always been part of consulting, but I don't think is where the value sits and resides, right? So it's reframing the value. It's actually not reframing the value. It's leaning into the value that clients actually want and helping them understand how there's now more space for that value than there was historically, through those people. And I think the analogy that we always use is, I made the calculator example earlier, right? I can do a math problem for you by hand, but if I plugged it into a calculator, or better yet, built an Excel model through which to run your P&L and model different potential outcomes, that hasn't diminished my value as a consultant. It's actually heightened my value as a consultant because I'm now able to do more sophisticated pieces of work than if I had pen, paper, and an abacus, like doing this for you, right? So it's making the esoteric more real and feel, helping them understand it's a tool, not a substitute.
That's awesome. Well said. So, in your journey of implementing AI, what is that one unexpected benefit or insight that you have discovered as the result of implementing AI that you would like to share with the listeners today that you had not thought about when you first
That's a
started
good
this
question.
journey?
I think it's actually the cultural impact of AI, right? So I could have envisioned early on the enrichment of our work. There's some like medium surprises that I've encountered around, AI is not just enriching our workflow and work product, but as we've gone through a custom implementation of it, it's begun to mirror our thinking. So, our stuff is steeped in management philosophy, and I can see the AI spitting back content to me that's steeped in our management philosophy. And that's, very particular to us. And that's really cool. Could probably have envisioned that, maybe not believed it, but envisioned it. I think the thing I didn't envision was how much energy it would spark on the team itself. I think we've always had a little bit of a startup feel despite being a strategy consulting firm. And that's, a byproduct of our age and the profile of person that we hire and how selective we are. But I think AI and our use of technology in general has injected much more of a true startup, Silicon Valley type vibe where people feel like they're creating and innovating, not just in the consulting world, but creating and innovating on the frontier of how this industry works. And both in terms of how that reflects day to day within interactions within the firm, but I also think in terms of talent acquisition, it's made a big difference because I think most people, if they're smart and they're driven and they want to do something with their careers, want to do cool stuff. And I think that cool factor around not just using AI, but how effective our existing team has been at it and the way they speak about it, I think it's infectious internal to the firm and with prospective hires and with clients also. And so I think it's it's hard to articulate exactly what's happened to our culture, but there's this very different energy this year than there was 3 years ago. And I think, not to give AI too much credit, but I think AI is like a big part of it.
Maybe people are finally feeling the relief of not having to do things that they did enjoy doing, and now they are able to focus on things that they really feel like adds value to through the work that they want to do.
I think that's not just probably, I think that's absolutely true, right? I think there's this feeling of you've got this anchor point now that is automating some of the mundane work that was out there. But also if you're struggling on a project and consultants get writer's block, but it's like writer's block in the brain where you've been thinking about the same problem for such a long time that you're basically start to go in circles about what the answer is. So short of having to go to your boss or a peer or somebody, even more junior than you on a case team, to be able to spar with AI about that thought and not take it for its word, but have a different thought partner at the table, I think that's likely very, very refreshing because it takes that person who's stuck at their desk and gets them unstuck in some meaningful way.
Yeah, so true. So as we wrap up the episode today, for the leaders who are listening to us today and who are on the fence about AI, what advice would you give? Are there any specific preparations or mindsets you believe are crucial for successful AI integration in the business world?
Yeah, I think that's a whole can of worms. I'll give you three, maybe. I think one is, I think leadership has to educate itself about AI. I think one of the biggest problems I'm seeing across clients, private sector as well as federal government, is people are waiting for somebody else to give them the answer on AI. And, so they'll task one person or two people or three people in the organization to go evaluate AI and come back and let them know the answer. And I think you're only getting part of the answer at that point, and you haven't, as a leader, truly understood what AI is capable of. So I think leaders have to get off the sideline and get hands-on AI directly themselves, see what's possible, try and push the boundaries of what's possible, and drive this thing as much top-down as they're trying to drive it bottom-up. And I think that's a big missing piece of a lot of organizations. I think the second piece is, and this is still on the get off the sidelines piece, I was talking to a client the other day, a pretty large company in the United States, and they were talking about how they were going to pilot AI for one specific workflow within human resources. And I'm like, cool. And this person's brilliant, like a brilliant executive, but what if that one test case fails? And how do you know that's the right test case? Would failure on that one particular test case cause you to back off of AI altogether? Potentially. And so I think part of get off the sidelines is actually have a plan, right? Instead of doing one individualized test case that's purely organic, taking a step back and thinking about what is my actual roadmap? What are all the portions of my business that could be touched by AI? And let's, from that large list, identify where the most potential value is and have several test balloons that go up to see what works. I think that's a much richer place, but I think it's got to be top down in both of those ways. Senior leadership's got to be involved. There's got to be a top down strategy and a roadmap around AI. And I think the final piece is they got to be careful about who you're working with on the AI front. This is still relatively new, frontier space in the grand scheme of things. We're at very early stages of this transformation. It's going to be hugely disruptive. I don't think everybody fully gets, despite the press, how disruptive it's going to be. But with that, I think come a lot of companies out there who are going to purport to be able to help somebody along the AI journey and are still figuring it out themselves. So I think the chances that I think there's risk out there that you could sign up with the wrong partner, with somebody who says they understand how AI works, who gets you down a very wrong path, and you either don't get your ROI or you end up with a very flawed sense of what's possible via AI. So I think that final piece is much more around partner selection and just a lot of care to make sure that the people that you're working with and engaging are actually competent and can help show you the way versus potentially being obstacles along.
What a great note to end this episode on. I know we can talk for another hour because I feel like this is when we were getting started on a next chapter of our conversation, but we will wrap up today. And we've had a great conversation. We learned so much. So thank you, Saurabh, for sharing your insight. To our audience, Saurabh Kapoor, a leader who took a bold step of integrating AI into his consulting practice and has demonstrated how technology can be harnessed not just as a tool, but as a strategic advantage. And through his journey, we've seen that incorporating AI isn't just about efficiency or automation. It's about enhancing decision-making, deepening insights, and delivering greater value to clients. Saurabh has shared with us how he approached this transformation, starting from early experimentation, navigating critical choices, and ultimately creating a platform that's driving real impact across industries. For those of you leading organizations or consulting practices, Saurabh's story shows that AI adoption doesn't need to be purely technical. Instead, it can be a carefully crafted strategy that combines technology with human insights to create powerful results. Thank you, Saurabh, for sharing your experience and lessons learned with us today.
Thanks for the invite and thanks for having me on.
And to our listeners, we hope today's conversation has inspired you to consider how AI might fit your own business strategy. Remember, it's not just about having the right tools. It's about having a vision for how those tools can elevate your impact. Thanks for tuning into TIDES, and we look forward to having you join us again for our next exploration of TIDES.